I stood in the shadows of the heavy iron gates, looking at the $5 million mansion I had bought to be a sanctuary for my family. But what I saw stopped my heart cold. My daughter, my only child, was on her knees in the pouring rain, scrubbing oil stains off the driveway with a toothbrush, while wearing a uniform that looked like rags. She did not even look up when I approached, because she was too terrified to stop working. They told her I was a criminal who abandoned her. They told her she had to pay for my sins. But what they did not know was that the man they left to rot in a foreign prison had survived. I calmly adjusted my coat, touched the scar on my face, and whispered to myself that it is time for justice. If you have ever felt the stinging pain of betrayal by those who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because this story is for you. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. 10 years is a long time. It is 3,650 days of thinking about nothing but home. When I finally walked down the street of my old neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut, the cold rain felt like a blessing after a decade of scorching heat in a South American cell. I did not look like Conrad Blackwood, the billionaire industrialist, anymore. My hair was long and gray, a jagged scar ran down my left cheek, and my clothes were second-hand things I had picked up at a shelter. I looked like a ghost, and in many ways I was one. I stood outside the gates of the Blackwood estate. The Georgian architecture was just as imposing as I remembered, but the soul of the house felt rotten. I did not enter through the front gate. I knew the security codes had been changed long ago. Instead, I slipped through a gap in the hedge near the service entrance, a weakness in the perimeter I had meant to fix a decade ago. I expected to see gardeners or security staff, but the grounds were quiet except for the sound of the rain hitting the pavement. That was when I saw her. A frail figure was hunched over on the cobblestone driveway. At first I thought it was a hired cleaner, but there was something familiar about the way she held her shoulders. I moved closer, stepping silently on the wet grass. The girl was shivering violently, her hands red and raw from the cold water and the rough stone. She was using a tiny toothbrush to scrub a motor oil stain aggressively, as if her life depended on removing that black mark. I stepped onto the driveway, and my boot scraped against the stone. The girl froze. She turned her head slowly, and when the lightning flashed, I saw her face. It was gaunt and pale with dark circles under her eyes, but I would recognize those green eyes anywhere. It was Lily, my daughter, my princess, who should have been 24 years old and running her own company by now. Lily. I choked out the word, my voice raspy from disuse. Is that you? I took a step toward her, my hand reaching out instinctively. I expected a hug. I expected tears of joy. I expected her to recognize the father who had read her bedtime stories every night for 14 years. But she did not see her father. She saw a strange, scarred man in dirty clothes approaching her in the dark. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her eyes wide with pure animal terror. Please, sir, she stammered, her voice trembling more from fear than the cold. You have to leave. You cannot be here. I stopped confused. Lily, look at me. It is me. It is Dad. She shook her head frantically, glancing toward the house as if the windows were watching eyes. No, please do not play games. If the mistress sees you talking to me, she will think I am slacking off. She already said, if I do not get this stain out by noon, I do not get to eat for 2 days. Please just go before she comes out. The mistress. She was calling her stepmother, Victoria the mistress, and she was starving. My daughter, the heir to the Blackwood fortune, was being starved and forced to scrub floors like a slave in the house I built for her. The rage that ignited in my chest was hot enough to dry the rain on my skin. I wanted to storm into that house and tear it apart brick by brick, but I stopped myself. I looked at Lily flinching away from me, and I realized she truly did not know who I was. To her, I was just a threat, a reason for punishment. If I revealed myself now, without power, without resources, Victoria would just call the police and have me arrested for trespassing or worse. She had already faked my death certificate. To the world, I was a dead criminal. I needed more than just anger. I needed a plan. I took a deep breath, forcing my fists to unclench. "I am sorry, miss," I whispered, my heart breaking as I backed away into the shadows. "I did not mean to cause you trouble." I watched her go back to scrubbing with frantic, desperate energy, and I made a silent vow to the rain. Victoria was going to pay. She was going to lose everything, but first I had to become someone else to get close enough to destroy her. The roar of a high-performance engine cut through the sound of the falling rain, and before I could step back into the cover of the hedges, the massive iron gates began to swing open. Twin beams of blinding white light swept across the driveway, illuminating Lily in her humiliating position on the wet stones. A silver Bentley convertible, the kind that costs more than most people earn in a decade, surged through the entrance. It was moving too fast for the weather, the tires slick against the cobblestones. The driver slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt, just inches from where my daughter was kneeling. My heart hammered against my ribs as I recognized the car. It was mine, or at least it had been mine 10 years ago. Now it was being driven by the parasites who had stolen my life. The driver's side door flew open, and a young man stepped out. It was Braden, Victoria's son from her first marriage. He was 26 now, wearing a designer suit that was likely tailored in Milan, but his face still held the same petulant cruelty I remembered from his teenage years. He looked down at Lily, who was scrambling to move the bucket of black, oily water out of his path. Instead of stepping around her, Braden drew his leg back and kicked the plastic bucket with all his strength. The impact sent a wave of cold, filthy sludge flying through the air. It drenched Lily from head to toe, ruining her already ragged uniform and splattering across my legs and chest. Braden laughed, a sound that was ugly and devoid of any human warmth. He looked at me with a sneer of absolute disgust. He did not ask who I was or why I was there. To him, I was just another piece of trash that had blown onto the estate. Then the passenger door opened, and she stepped out. Victoria, my wife. The woman who had promised to love my daughter like her own. She looked immaculate, her hair perfectly styled, despite the humidity, draped in a fur coat that I knew had been bought with money stolen from my accounts. She scanned the scene, her eyes cold and dead as shark eyes. She did not recognize the man standing 10 feet away from her. The scar, the beard, the weight loss, and the grime of travel had rendered me invisible to her. She did not see her husband, Conrad Blackwood. She saw a vagrant. "Who is this filth?" she demanded, her voice dripping with venom as she pointed a manicured finger at me. Lily was shaking violently now, wiping the oil from her eyes with trembling hands. I tried to step forward, my fists clenching at my sides, ready to scream my name, ready to demand answers, but Victoria did not even let me speak. She turned her fury on Lily. "I told you no visitors, you little leech. Get this smelly vagrant off my property immediately. If he is not gone in 30 seconds, I am adding $500 to your father's debt." The mention of the debt froze me in place. $500 for the crime of existing. I watched as Lily flinched, as if she had been physically struck. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror, and whispered, "Please, sir, just go. Please do not make it worse for me. I cannot afford another fine." I saw the pure desperation in her gaze, and I realized that fighting back right now would only hurt her. I was powerless in this moment, but power shifts. I swallowed my rage, forcing my body to relax. I looked at Victoria one last time, memorizing the cruelty on her face. I lowered my head and turned, walking back toward the dark street. As I disappeared into the rain, I heard Braden laughing again, but I did not look back. I was not leaving in defeat. I was leaving to get my weapons. The neon sign of Cole and Associates flickered in the rain, a beacon of the old life I had lost. I did not use the main elevator. I took the service stairs up to the 4th floor, my heart pounding not from exertion, but from the dread of what I was about to learn. Sebastian Cole was the only man in the world who knew I was still breathing. When I opened his office door, he dropped his fountain pen ink, staining the pristine blotter on his mahogany desk. He looked older, his hair thinner, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence I had relied on for 30 years. "Conrad," he whispered, his voice trembling, as he rounded the desk to grip my shoulders. "I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." I sat heavily in the leather chair, the wet fabric of my coat staining the expensive upholstery. "To the world, I am dead." "Sebastian," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I just met my wife. She looked right through me. She treated me like a stray dog. How did this happen? How does she have everything?" Sebastian sighed and pulled a thick file from his safe. He slid a document across the desk. It was a death certificate. My death certificate. Dated 5 years ago. Cause of death, accidental drowning in the Amazon. She had me declared dead in absentia, Conrad. She claimed you went on a solo expedition and never came back. With this piece of paper, she unlocked the accounts, she seized the properties, and she took control of the company. I stared at the paper that had erased my existence, but that was not the question that burned in my throat. I pushed the paper away. "I do not care about the money right now, Sebastian." I saw Lily. She was scrubbing the driveway in the rain. She looked like a prisoner of war. She called Victoria the mistress, and she was terrified of a $500 fine. "Why is my daughter a servant in her own home?" Sebastian looked away, his expression pained. "This is the hardest part, my friend. Victoria did not just steal your money. She stole your legacy." He opened another folder, revealing a stack of forged financial documents. "Victoria told Lily that you did not just disappear. She told her you ran away to escape the law. She concocted a story that you embezzled millions from the company pension fund and left the family in financial ruin. She convinced Lily that the authorities were looking for you and that the only reason the police had not seized the house was because Victoria was graciously paying off your debts out of her own pocket." The air left my lungs. My daughter thought I was a criminal. She thought I was a coward who abandoned her to save himself. "That is why she is working," Sebastian continued softly. "Victoria created a fake debt ledger. She charges Lily for rent, for food, for electricity, even for the clothes on her back. She tells Lily that every hour she works goes toward paying back the money you stole. She has convinced that poor girl that she is working to redeem the family name. She is not just abusing her Conrad. She is gaslighting her into slavery." I closed my eyes, feeling a pain sharper than any torture I had endured in prison. Victoria had turned my daughter's love into shame. She had turned my absence into a weapon. I stood up, the death certificate crumpling in my fist. "She thinks she has won because I am dead," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But ghosts can do things living men cannot." Sebastian reached for the secure line on his desk, his hand hovering over the receiver, ready to unleash the full weight of the law. "I can have a team of forensic accountants freeze her assets by morning, Conrad. We can file an immediate injunction to remove her from the estate and challenge the death certificate legally. We can have the police there in an hour to escort her off the premises." It was the logical move. It was the safe move. But logic does not apply when you are dealing with a predator like Victoria. I shook my head slowly and placed my hand over his, stopping him. "No police, Sebastian. Not yet. If we drag this into court now, she will use my money to hire the best defense team in the state. She will paint herself as the victim of a long-lost husband who abandoned his family. And while the lawyers argue for years, Lily will still be trapped in that house with her. Victoria has already proven she can manipulate the truth. I need something undeniable. I need to catch her in the act. I need to go back there," I said, my voice firm. Sebastian looked at me like I had lost my mind. "You were just there, Conrad. She threatened to have you arrested. You cannot just walk in the front door." I walked over to the small bathroom adjoining his office and looked in the mirror. The man staring back was a stranger, wild and unkempt. "No," I said, picking up a pair of scissors from the vanity. "Conrad Blackwood cannot walk back in there. But someone else can." I started cutting. Huge clumps of matted gray hair fell into the sink. I took a razor and shaved the thick beard that had covered my face for a decade. As the hair fell away, the jagged scar on my left cheek was revealed in the harsh fluorescent light. It ran from my eye to my jaw, a permanent souvenir from a prison riot. It made me look dangerous. It made me look broken. Perfect. I washed my face and turned back to Sebastian. "My name is Thomas," I said, pitching my voice lower, adding a gravelly roughness that sounded like a lifetime of hard labor and cheap cigarettes. "I am an itinerant gardener looking for work. I have no family, I have no history, and I am desperate enough to work for minimum wage." "Victoria is cheap, Sebastian. She will not hire a professional firm if she thinks she can exploit a desperate man. Make me a background. Make it solid enough to pass a cursory glance, but tragic enough that she feels superior to me." Sebastian hesitated for a moment, his lawyerly instincts warring with his loyalty. Finally, he nodded and turned to his computer, typing rapidly, to fabricate a life for a man who did not exist. 2 hours later, I stood in front of the service entrance of my own estate holding a crumpled resume that listed 10 years of landscaping experience in states I had never visited. I wore a faded blue work shirt and heavy boots Sebastian had sent a clerk to buy. I did not ring the bell. I waited by the side gate, knowing Victoria's routine. At 10 o'clock sharp, the electric gates buzzed. She was leaving for her tennis lesson. As the Bentley rolled down the drive, I stepped out, not aggressively, but with the slumped posture of a man beaten by life. She slowed the car, not out of kindness, but out of curiosity. She rolled down the window just an inch, her nose wrinkling as she looked at my scar. "What do you want?" she snapped. I held up the paper, my hand trembling slightly as part of the act. "I heard you might need a gardener, ma'am. I work cheap and I do not ask questions." Her eyes lit up with that predatory gleam I now recognized. Cheap was her favorite word. "Go round the back," she said, dismissing me with a wave. "Find the girl. Tell her I said to give you the shed key. But if I see one weed on the lawn, you are out." She drove off, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I was in. The Trojan horse had entered the gates, and the war had officially begun. The accommodations Victoria had assigned to her stepdaughter were not a room, they were an insult. When I walked into the gardening shed to stow my gear, the smell hit me first. It was a mixture of old gasoline, damp earth, and fertilizer. In the corner, behind a stack of rusted lawnmower blades, lay a thin, dirty mattress on the concrete floor. There was no heating. There was no bathroom. Just a bucket in the corner and a single threadbare blanket that I recognized as one we used to use for the dogs. Lily was sitting on the edge of the mattress, holding something in her hands as if it were a precious jewel. When she saw me, she tried to hide it behind her back, but I had already seen what it was. A heel of stale bread, the kind you cut off before making sandwiches for a party. She was eating the trash from the main house. I turned away, pretending to organize a shelf of tools so she would not see the tears of rage burning in my eyes. I wanted to burn the main house to the ground, but I had to wait. I had to watch. My first day on the job was a lesson in cruelty. By mid-afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds, and Braden decided it was time to practice his golf swing. He did not go to the country club. He set up a tee right in the middle of the pristine back lawn. "Hey, Leach," he shouted, his voice echoing off the garden walls. "Get out here, I need a flag." I watched from behind a hydrangea bush, gripping a pair of shears so hard my knuckles turned white. Lily walked out onto the grass, her head bowed, trembling. She stood about 50 yards away. Braden laughed and placed a ball on the tee. "If you flinch, I tell Mother you were stealing silver," he taunted. He pulled back the club and swung. The ball whistled through the air, slicing past Lily's head by mere inches. She gasped and covered her face. Nice reflexes, Braden jeered, teeing up another ball. Let us see if I can get closer this time. He was using my daughter for target practice. He was hunting her for sport. I looked down at the irrigation control box next to my knee. It was an old manual system I had installed myself 20 years ago. I knew exactly which valve controlled the high-pressure sprinklers lining the fairway of the lawn. I also knew that the pressure regulator had a tendency to stick if you forced it past the safety line. I did not hesitate. I cranked the valve handle hard, bypassing the limiter, and opened the line full bore. There was a thudding sound in the pipes like a hammer striking metal. Suddenly, the sprinkler head directly in front of Braden exploded upward. A jet of water pressurized enough to strip paint blasted him square in the face. The force of the impact lifted him off his feet. He flailed his arms, screaming as he was thrown backward, tumbling head over heels directly into Victoria's prize-winning rose bushes. The thorns tore at his expensive polo shirt and scratched his face as he thrashed around in the mud, soaking wet and shrieking like a child. I ran over, feigning panic. "Oh my God, sir," I shouted, my voice full of fake concern. "The valve must have blown." "Are you all right?" Lily stood frozen on the lawn, and for a split second amidst the terror, I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. It was the first time I had seen her almost smile. Night fell over the estate like a heavy black shroud, and the temperature in the gardening shed dropped until I could see my own breath. I had slipped out earlier under the pretense of disposing of garden waste and walked 2 miles to a roadside diner. Now I stood in the doorway of the shed, holding a warm foil-wrapped cheeseburger and a cup of hot soup against my chest, trying to shield them from the cold. Lily was curled up on the mattress, shivering under the thin blanket. When I stepped inside, she sat up quickly, her eyes darting to the door in panic. I held out the food. "It is not much," I whispered, closing the door softly behind me. "But it is hot. Take it." She stared at the burger as if it were a bomb. "I cannot," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Thomas, take it away. If the mistress smells meat in here, she will accuse me of stealing from the kitchen. She counts the inventory every night, even the leftovers." I felt a lump form in my throat. Victoria was not just starving her, she was terrorizing her with surveillance. I sat on the cold concrete floor and unwrapped the burger, hoping the smell alone might tempt her, but she pulled a small hard object from her pocket. It was a crust of dry bread rock, hard and stale. "This is safe," she said, breaking it in two with a snap that sounded too loud in the quiet shed. She held out half to me, her hand trembling. "We can share this. It is honest food." I took the bread, looking at her dirt-stained fingers. "You should not be living like this, Lily," I said gently, my voice thick with suppressed emotion. "You are a young woman. You should be in college or traveling. Why do you stay here and let them treat you like an animal?" She looked down at the floor, her shoulders hunching in shame. "Because I have to," she replied softly. "I have to pay for what he did." Who, I asked, though I knew the answer. "My father." She spat the word out like a curse. "Conrad Blackwood. He was a thief and a coward. He built this company on lies, and when the law finally caught up with him, he ran away. He stole millions from the pension funds of his own workers. He left innocent families destitute, and he left me with his debt. The mistress says it is my burden to carry. Every dollar I earn scrubbing floors goes to paying back the people he hurt. If I leave, I am just like him, a criminal." Hearing my own daughter speak about me with such venom was more painful than the years of isolation in prison. Victoria had not just killed me on paper, she had assassinated my character in the only heart that mattered. She had turned my legacy into a source of shame for Lily. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell her I was framed, that I was kidnapped, that I never stole a dime. But I looked at her fragile state and knew she would not believe me. Not yet. I forced myself to swallow the dry bread. It tasted like dust and ashes in my mouth. He sounds like a monster, I said, my voice breaking. She whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. I hate him for what he did to us. I sat there in the darkness listening to my daughter curse my name, and I made a silent promise. I would not just clear my name. I would make sure Victoria paid for every single lie she had poisoned my daughter's mind with. The driveway that I had once walked down as the master of the house was now a parking lot for the elite of Greenwich. Shiny black Mercedes, vintage Jaguars, and sleek Porsches lined the cobblestones like a parade of wealth and vanity. Victoria was hosting the monthly meeting of the Greenwich Charity League, and she had transformed the terrace into a stage for her greatest performance yet. From my vantage point, behind the manicured boxwood hedges, where I was pretending to trim the leaves, I watched the ladies arrive. They were draped in pastel silks and pearls, their laughter tinkling like broken glass against the stone facade. They had come to drink champagne and congratulate themselves on their benevolence, but the real entertainment was about to begin. Victoria stepped out onto the terrace wearing a white dress that cost more than a mid-size car. She looked like an angel of mercy, her face arranged in a mask of long, suffering patience. Ladies, she announced, her voice projecting perfectly to the back of the group. Thank you all for coming. You know how difficult things have been since Conrad abandoned us, but your support means the world to me. A chorus of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the crowd. You are a saint, Victoria, one woman said, clutching her diamond necklace. Most women would have sold the estate and moved to Paris, but you stayed to clean up his mess. Victoria sighed dramatically, dabbing a non-existent tear from her eye. One does what one must for family, she replied. Speaking of which, I want you to meet Lily. My breath hitched in my throat. I expected her to hide Lily away, to keep the shameful secret of her servitude locked in the dark. But I had underestimated Victoria's cruelty. She did not want to hide Lily, she wanted to use her. The patio doors opened, and my daughter stepped out. I almost dropped my shears. Victoria had forced her to wear a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too small, the fabric stained and torn in strategic places. Her hair was unwashed and hanging in her face. She looked like a street urchin from a Victorian novel. It was a costume designed to strip her of any dignity, to make her look mentally unstable and pathetic. Lily was carrying a massive silver tea service on a heavy wooden tray. Her thin arms were trembling under the weight, the porcelain cups rattling against their saucers. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, terrified of making eye contact. Oh, poor dear, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Is that the daughter? She looks deranged. Victoria nodded sadly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is the trauma. She refuses to wear the nice clothes I buy her. She insists on wearing rags and doing manual labor. She thinks she needs to be punished for her father's crimes. We have tried therapy, but she is just so broken. I simply let her help out so she feels useful. It is the only thing that keeps her calm. The lies were so effortless, so absolute. The women looked at Lily not with pity, but with a mixture of revulsion and morbid curiosity. They saw a broken thing, a problem that Victoria was heroically managing. They did not see the malnutrition or the terror in her eyes. They only saw what Victoria wanted them to see. Lily moved toward the main table, her knees shaking. The tray was too heavy for her. I could see the muscles in her neck straining. She was fighting to keep it steady, fighting to survive the humiliation of serving the people she used to call neighbors. I took a step forward, my instinct to protect her overriding my cover, but I stopped myself. If I moved now, I would just be the crazy gardener attacking a guest. I had to watch. I had to witness every second of this torture, so that when I finally brought the hammer down on Victoria, I would not feel a single ounce of mercy. The disaster happened in slow motion. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose jewelry weighed more than her common sense, was gesturing wildly, with a crystal goblet of Pinot Noir in her hand. She was recounting a story about her summer in Tuscany, and in her excitement, her diamond bracelet snagged on the edge of the heavy silver tray Lily was holding. The goblet tipped. Dark red wine cascaded down like a waterfall, splashing onto the cream-colored silk upholstery of the antique chair and pooling onto the hand-woven Persian rug beneath it. The stain spread instantly, looking like a fresh arterial wound on the pristine wool. The conversation stopped dead. Mrs. Gable gasped, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. "Oh, my heavens," she cried, looking at the mess. For a second there was silence. Then Victoria moved. She did not rush to help her guest. She did not call for a towel. She turned on Lily with the speed and ferocity of a viper striking its prey. "You clumsy little idiot!" she shrieked, her voice losing all its cultivated warmth. "Look what you have done!" Lily was trembling so hard the remaining cups on the tray rattled like chattering teeth. "I did not," she stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "She hit the tray. I did not mean to." "Do not you dare lie to me," Victoria hissed. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her hand lashed out in a blur of movement. The sound of the slap was sickeningly loud, a sharp crack of flesh against flesh that echoed off the stone walls of the terrace. Lily's head snapped to the side. She dropped the heavy tray. Silver and china crashed to the stone floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Lily fell to her knees, clutching her cheek where a bright red handprint was already blooming on her pale skin. The guests stared in frozen horror, but nobody moved to help her. Victoria stood over her chest, heaving her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You useless waste of space," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "That rug is an 18th century original. It is worth more than your entire miserable life. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown in the cellar." I was standing 10 feet away, polishing the glass of the French doors with a rag. My entire body went rigid. The rage that surged through me was so intense my vision blurred at the edges. I wanted to drop the rag across the terrace and wrap my hands around Victoria's throat until she stopped breathing. I wanted to show these high society vultures what a father's justice looked like, but I froze. My hand moved instinctively to the second button of my work shirt. I pressed it once. The tiny lens concealed within the plastic button blinked silently, recording every frame of the abuse. I turned my body slightly, ensuring I had a clear angle of Victoria standing over my cowering daughter, ensuring the microphone picked up every cruel syllable. I recorded the tears streaming down Lily's face. I recorded the way she scrambled backward on the broken porcelain, cutting her hands to get away from her stepmother. I recorded the way Victoria smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and turned back to her guests with a chillingly calm smile. "I am so sorry, ladies," she said, her voice returning to its fake sweetness. "It is so hard to find good help these days, especially when you are doing charity work. Please let us move to the drawing room while the staff cleans this up." As she ushered the women inside, stepping over the shards of china without a second glance, I stopped recording. I had it. The first nail in her coffin. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to scream, but as I looked at the digital file saving to the memory card, I knew that slap would cost Victoria her freedom. The silence of the house was more terrifying than the shouting. Over the next few days, I watched my daughter fade before my eyes. Lily moved through the gardens like a sleepwalker, her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Her eyes, once bright and intelligent, were now glassy and vacant. When I tried to speak to her, she would stare through me, her words slurred and nonsensical. Victoria told the staff and the neighbors that Lily was suffering from severe depression and anxiety, but I knew that look. I had seen it in the prison infirmary on the faces of inmates who were chemically restrained. This was not sadness. This was sedation. My suspicion turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach on Tuesday morning. I watched through the kitchen window as Victoria prepared breakfast. She poured a glass of orange juice and then opened a cheerful yellow bottle labeled Organic Brain Health. She shook 2 large white capsules into her hand and forced them into Lily's palm. "Make sure you take your vitamins, darling." Victoria cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "You need your strength." Lily swallowed them obediently, her hand trembling. 10 minutes later, she was slumped at the table, barely able to lift her spoon. I knew I had to get that bottle. The opportunity came that afternoon when I was tasked with taking the household trash to the curb. I hauled the heavy black bags to the service entrance, but instead of leaving them, I tore them open. I dug through coffee grounds and discarded food, ignoring the stench until I found the trash from the master bathroom. Buried deep inside a tissue box was a prescription bottle with the label partially scraped off. I could just make out the name of a powerful antipsychotic drug used to treat severe schizophrenia. It was a heavy sedative meant to pacify violent patients, not a young woman with a broken heart. I met Sebastian in the alley behind a laundromat that evening, handing him the prescription bottle and a single white capsule I had managed to swipe from the kitchen counter when the cook's back was turned. He called me an hour later, his voice shaking with rage. "Conrad," he said, "the lab confirmed it. The capsules in the vitamin bottle have been swapped. She is feeding Lily a dosage high enough to knock out a horse. It causes memory loss, confusion, and extreme lethargy. She is keeping her drugged so she cannot think straight. She is chemically lobotomizing your daughter." The revelation nearly brought me to my knees. Victoria was not just manipulating Lily, she was poisoning her, ensuring she remained too weak to question the lies, too confused to fight back. That night, I became a thief in my own home. I waited until the house was silent, until the only sound was the wind in the trees. I used a tension wrench to pick the lock on the kitchen door, a skill I had learned from a cellmate serving life for burglary. I crept across the marble floor, the moonlight casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. I found the yellow bottle on the high shelf. My hands were steady as I unscrewed the cap. I emptied the toxic capsules into a Ziploc bag to keep as evidence. In their place, I poured in harmless sugar pills I had bought at the pharmacy that looked identical to the sedatives. I screwed the cap back on and placed the bottle exactly where I found it. As I slipped back out into the night, I felt a grim satisfaction. Tomorrow Lily would take her medicine, but this time the fog would lift. Victoria was about to deal with a Blackwood who was finally waking up. The scent of expensive lavender oil trailed behind the silver Bentley as Victoria sped off toward the country club spa. She had a 2-hour appointment for a diamond dust facial, a frivolous luxury that cost more than my daughter's food budget for a year. I watched the gates close and immediately dropped my rake. This was the window I had been waiting for. I slipped through the French doors of the East Wing, moving silently across the marble floors I had paid for 2 decades ago. My target was the master study, a room that had once been the command center of my global empire, but was now Victoria's lair. The heavy mahogany doors were locked, but the brass mechanism was old, and I had spent 10 years learning how to bypass much more sophisticated security than this. A quick twist of my tension tool and the lock clicked open. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. My antique desk was cluttered with piles of unopened mail and fashion magazines. I started digging. I ignored the superficial bills and went straight for the bottom drawer, the one she kept double-locked. Inside, buried beneath a stack of old society pages, was a red leather portfolio. I opened it, and the air left my lungs. I expected greed. I expected theft. But I did not expect this level of catastrophic stupidity. Victoria was not just spending my money, she was lighting it on fire. The first document was a foreclosure notice from the bank labeled Final Warning. She had taken out 3 secret mortgages on the estate, leveraging the equity to the absolute limit. The second document explained where the money had gone. It was a transaction log from a cryptocurrency exchange. Page after page of massive buy orders followed by panic sales. She had gambled millions on speculative digital coins that had crashed to zero. She was not a savvy investor. She was a degenerate gambler, chasing losses. I did the math quickly, my finger tracing the columns of red ink. The total debt was staggering. She owed over $3 million to the bank and various private creditors. But the spending did not stop there. I found a separate folder labeled Consulting Fees. Inside were monthly wire transfers of $10,000 to a man named Alessandro in Miami. I found a photo tucked in the back. He was a fitness instructor young enough to be her son, posing on a yacht she had likely paid for. She was bleeding the estate dry to fund a boy toy while my daughter slept in a shed. Then I found the paper that made my blood run cold. It was a draft contract from a shady real estate liquidator. It was an agreement to sell the mansion in a quiet off-market cash deal for a fraction of its true value. She was not just planning to sell, she was planning a fire sale. The closing date was set for next week. She intended to take the cash, dump the debt, and flee the country, probably to join Alessandro, leaving Lily homeless and destitute. I took photos of every document, my hands shaking with a cold fury. Victoria was not just a cruel stepmother, she was a cornered rat, and rats are most dangerous when they are about to run. I carefully replaced the files and locked the drawer. As I walked back to the garden, I realized the timeline had shifted. I did not have months to destroy her. I had days. The sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the lawn as I made my way back to the gardening shed. I needed time to process the financial disaster I had uncovered in Victoria's office, but the moment I reached the service area, I knew my sanctuary had been violated. The door to the shed was wide open, swinging lazily on its hinges. The sound of crashing metal and shattering glass echoed from inside. I broke into a run, my heavy boots pounding against the gravel. When I stepped through the doorway, I found Braden standing in the center of the small room, kicking over my bucket of tools. He had torn the thin mattress off the floor and emptied my rucksack onto the concrete. He was looking for something to pin on me, some reason to have the new gardener fired or arrested, because he simply did not like the look of me. "Well, well, well," Braden sneered, kicking a pile of my clothes. "I knew you were hiding something, old man. You walk around here like you own the place, but you are just trash." He bent down, picking up a small bundle wrapped in an oil-stained rag that he had pulled from beneath a loose floorboard. My heart stopped. It was the one thing I had managed to keep hidden, the one piece of my past life that I had not been able to part with. He unwrapped the rag, and the dying sunlight caught the gold casing of the Patek Philippe watch. It was a vintage piece worth more than a luxury car, a gift from my father on my 30th birthday. It was the only proof I had left that I was Conrad Blackwood. Braden stared at the watch, his eyes widening in disbelief. He looked at the watch, then at me, and a malicious grin spread across his face. "A Patek Philippe," he laughed, holding it up to the light. "This is a $100,000 watch. There is no way a bum like you owns this legally. You stole this. You stole this from the house." He did not wait for an explanation. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the emergency dial button. "I am calling the police. You are going to jail for grand larceny, you filthy thief. If the police came, they would run my prints. They would find out I was supposed to be dead. My plan to save Lily would be over before it began." I did not think. I reacted. 10 years of surviving in a prison yard took over. I crossed the distance between us in 2 strides. Before Braden could tap the screen, I grabbed his wrist. I did not just hold it, I twisted it, applying pressure to a nerve point I had learned about the hard way. Braden shrieked, dropping the phone and the watch. I caught the watch with my free hand before it hit the floor, and in the same fluid motion, I spun him around and slammed him face first against the rough wooden wall of the shed. I pinned his arm behind his back, lifting it until he whimpered in pain. I leaned in close, my mouth right next to his ear. My voice was a low growl, the voice of a man who had killed to survive. "Listen to me very carefully, you spoiled little brat. You are not calling anyone." Braden struggled, trying to kick me, but I tightened my grip, forcing him up onto his toes. "Get off me," he screamed. "I will tell my mother." "Go ahead," I whispered. "Tell her. And when you do, I will tell her about the diamond earrings you stole from her jewelry box last Tuesday. I will tell her about the antique silver you pawned on 4th Street to pay your bookie. I saw the receipts, Braden. I know exactly what you are." He froze instantly. His struggles ceased, replaced by a tremor of pure fear. He thought he was invisible in his own home, but he had forgotten that the help sees everything. "You are lying," he gasped, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me," I hissed, giving his arm one final painful wrench before shoving him away. Braden stumbled backward, rubbing his shoulder, his face pale and sweaty. He looked at me with a mixture of terror and confusion, unable to reconcile the dirty gardener with the man who had just dominated him effortlessly. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "And if you ever touch my things again, I will break your fingers." He did not say a word. He scrambled out of the shed, running toward the main house like a frightened child, leaving me alone in the darkening room, with my father's watch ticking steadily in my hand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the lawn as I made my way back to the gardening shed. I needed time to process the financial disaster I had uncovered in Victoria's office, but the moment I reached the service area, I knew my sanctuary had been violated. The door to the shed was wide open, swinging lazily on its hinges. The sound of crashing metal and shattering glass echoed from inside. I broke into a run, my heavy boots pounding against the gravel. When I stepped through the doorway, I found Braden standing in the center of the small room, kicking over my bucket of tools. He had torn the thin mattress off the floor and emptied my rucksack onto the concrete. He was looking for something to pin on me, some reason to have the new gardener fired or arrested, because he simply did not like the look of me. "Well, well, well," Braden sneered, kicking a pile of my clothes. "I knew you were hiding something, old man. You walk around here like you own the place, but you are just trash." He bent down, picking up a small bundle wrapped in an oil-stained rag that he had pulled from beneath a loose floorboard. My heart stopped. It was the one thing I had managed to keep hidden, the one piece of my past life that I had not been able to part with. He unwrapped the rag, and the dying sunlight caught the gold casing of the Patek Philippe watch. It was a vintage piece worth more than a luxury car, a gift from my father on my 30th birthday. It was the only proof I had left that I was Conrad Blackwood. Braden stared at the watch, his eyes widening in disbelief. He looked at the watch, then at me, and a malicious grin spread across his face. "A Patek Philippe," he laughed, holding it up to the light. "This is a $100,000 watch. There is no way a bum like you owns this legally. You stole this. You stole this from the house." He did not wait for an explanation. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the emergency dial button. "I am calling the police. You are going to jail for grand larceny, you filthy thief. If the police came, they would run my prints. They would find out I was supposed to be dead." My plan to save Lily would be over before it began. I did not think. I reacted. 10 years of surviving in a prison yard took over. I crossed the distance between us in 2 strides. Before Braden could tap the screen, I grabbed his wrist. I did not just hold it, I twisted it, applying pressure to a nerve point I had learned about the hard way. Braden shrieked, dropping the phone and the watch. I caught the watch with my free hand before it hit the floor, and in the same fluid motion, I spun him around and slammed him face first against the rough wooden wall of the shed. I pinned his arm behind his back, lifting it until he whimpered in pain. I leaned in close, my mouth right next to his ear. My voice was a low growl, the voice of a man who had killed to survive. "Listen to me very carefully, you spoiled little brat. You are not calling anyone." Braden struggled, trying to kick me, but I tightened my grip, forcing him up onto his toes. "Get off me," he screamed. "I will tell my mother." "Go ahead," I whispered. "Tell her. And when you do, I will tell her about the diamond earrings you stole from her jewelry box last Tuesday. I will tell her about the antique silver you pawned on 4th Street to pay your bookie. I saw the receipts, Braden. I know exactly what you are." He froze instantly. His struggles ceased, replaced by a tremor of pure fear. He thought he was invisible in his own home, but He had forgotten that the help sees everything. "You are lying," he gasped, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me," I hissed, giving his arm one final painful wrench before shoving him away. Braden stumbled backward, rubbing his shoulder, his face pale and sweaty. He looked at me with a mixture of terror and confusion, unable to reconcile the dirty gardener with the man who had just dominated him effortlessly. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "And if you ever touch my things again, I will break your fingers." He did not say a word. He scrambled out of the shed, running toward the main house like a frightened child, leaving me alone in the darkening room, with my father's watch ticking steadily in my hand. The adrenaline from my confrontation with Braden was still coursing through my veins like liquid fire. I knew I could not stay in the shed tonight. Braden was a coward, but cowards are unpredictable when they are frightened. He might not call the police, but he might come back with a weapon or tell his mother a lie that would get me fired instantly. I needed to know exactly what Victoria was planning, and I needed to know now. I prowled the perimeter of the main house like a wolf guarding its territory. The lights in the sunroom were blazing, casting long rectangular beams onto the darkened lawn. I saw a silhouette pacing back and forth. It was Victoria. She was holding a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand and her phone in the other. I moved into the dense ivy that climbed the east wall, pressing my back against the cold stone just inches from the open window. Her voice drifted out, slurring slightly from the alcohol, but sharp with excitement. "Alessandro! Baby, listen to me. It is done. Stop worrying about the bank. By the time they figure out the mortgages are fraudulent, we will be sipping martinis on the deck of your boat." I held my breath. She was talking to the boy toy in Miami. I risked a glance around the window frame. Victoria was admiring herself in the reflection of the glass, toasting her own brilliance. "The broker called 10 minutes ago," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. "He found a private buyer, an investment group looking for off-market assets. They are willing to pay cash. $5 million, Alessandro. Wired directly to the Cayman account. No paper trail, no taxes, just pure freedom." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. $5 million was a fraction of what the estate was worth, but for a thief looking for a quick getaway, it was a fortune. But then came the question I was dreading. I heard the tinny sound of Alessandro's voice asking something on the other end. Victoria laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "What about the girl?" "Oh, please, Alessandro, do not be tedious. Lily stays here. She is part of the furniture as far as I am concerned. When the new owners take possession on Monday, they can evict her, or have her arrested for trespassing. It does not matter to me. I transferred the corporate debt to her name last week. By the time she realizes I am gone, she will be buried under so many lawsuits, she won't be able to afford a bus ticket to look for us. Let alone a lawyer Monday. Today was Friday. I had 3 days, 72 hours before my childhood home was sold to strangers and my daughter was thrown onto the street with a lifetime of debt shackled to her ankles. Victoria took a long swallow of her drink. "Monaco is going to be beautiful this time of year," she sighed. "Pack your bags, lover. We fly out Tuesday morning." I slid down the wall into the darkness, my mind racing. The timeline had collapsed. I did not have time to build a perfect legal case. I did not have time to wait for the slow wheels of justice to turn. I had to stop a $5 million transaction that was happening in 3 days. I had to outmaneuver a woman who had already packed her bags. I needed Sebastian, and I needed him right now. The slow game was over. It was time to flip the board. I waited until the house lights dimmed before making my way back to the shed. In my pocket, folded into a tight square, was the weapon Sebastian had handed me in the alleyway earlier that evening. It was not a gun or a knife, but a photocopy of a Wall Street Journal article from 5 years ago. It was the only thing that could cut through the web of lies Victoria had spun around my daughter. When I entered the shed, Lily was awake, sitting on her mattress with her knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. The effects of the sedative were wearing off thanks to the sugar pills I had swapped in, but the psychological damage was still raw. I sat down on the cold concrete across from her. "Lily," I said softly, "we need to talk about your father." She flinched and turned her head away. "Please, Thomas," she whispered. "I do not want to talk about him. He is the reason I am here. He is the reason I am a slave." "He is not," I said, my voice firm and urgent. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and smoothed it out on the floor between us. The headline was bold and undeniable. "Blackwood exonerated. Former CEO found innocent of embezzlement charges. Evidence points to internal setup." Lily stared at the paper but did not touch it. Her eyes scanned the headline, and I saw her breath hitch. "Read it," I urged. "Read the date, Lily. This was published 5 years ago. The courts cleared him. The debt you think you are paying does not exist. The company assets were frozen during the investigation, but they were released years ago. Your stepmother has access to millions of dollars. She has had it for years." Lily picked up the paper, her hands trembling so hard the paper rattled. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Her eyes widened, filling with a mixture of confusion and horror. "But she told me he was a fugitive," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "She told me the lawyers were taking everything. She said she was using her own savings to keep the police away from me." "Why would she lie?" "Because free labor is profitable," I said gently, reaching out to touch her hand. "Because as long as you believe you are in debt, she owns you. She has stolen your life, Lily. She has stolen your youth, and she has done it while living like a queen on the money that belongs to you." I watched the realization crash over her. The years of scrubbing floors, the hunger, the humiliation, it had all been for nothing. The narrative that had defined her existence for a decade was crumbling. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, not out of sadness, but out of a dawning, furious betrayal. "She lied," she whispered. "She lied about everything." I squeezed her hand. "Yes, she did. And she is planning one final lie. Tomorrow, she is going to come to you. She is going to be nice. She might even bring you food. She is going to put a piece of paper in front of you and tell you that signing it will fix everything. She will say it is to protect the house or to help the family." Lily looked at me, her green eyes finally clearing, showing a spark of the fire I remembered from her childhood. "What is it?" she asked. "It is a sale agreement," I said. "She is selling the house, Lily. She is taking the money and leaving the country, and she is planning to leave you here with nothing but the clothes on your back. Listen to me carefully. Do not sign it. No matter what she threatens, no matter what she promises, do not put your name on anything. Trust me. Can you do that?" Lily looked at the newspaper clipping one last time, then looked up at me. The fear was still there, but something else was growing beside it. Anger. "I trust you, Thomas," she said. "I will not sign." The morning sun filtered through the high arched windows of the drawing room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but it brought no warmth to the house. From my position outside on the terrace, where I was pretending to polish the brass handles of the French doors, I had a perfect view of the trap Victoria had set. She was seated on the velvet sofa, wearing a silk robe that looked like it had been spun from liquid gold. On the coffee table in front of her sat a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper and a silver fountain pen. It looked like a casual morning scene, but I knew it was an execution. Lily entered the room, her steps slow and hesitant. She was wearing the oversized gray uniform Victoria forced her to wear, but there was something different about her today. Her shoulders were not hunched quite as low. Her eyes were not fixed entirely on the floor. The truth I had given her the night before had planted a seed of resistance, and I prayed it had taken root deep enough to withstand the storm that was about to break. Victoria smiled, a predator baring its teeth. "Sit down, darling," she cooed, patting the cushion beside her. "We need to handle some administrative unpleasantness." Lily sat on the edge of the sofa, looking at the paper as if it were a poisonous snake. "What is this?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. Victoria sighed dramatically, picking up the pen and twirling it between her manicured fingers. "It is the solution to all our problems, sweetie. I found a way to settle your father's debts once and for all. This document simply authorizes me to liquidate the estate and use the proceeds to pay off the creditors. Once you sign this, you are free. No more scrubbing floors, no more debt. You can start over." It was a lie so smooth it almost sounded like mercy. But I knew the document was a power of attorney that would strip Lily of her inheritance rights forever. "I do not want to sign it," Lily said, pushing the paper away slightly. "I think I should read it first, or maybe have a lawyer look at it." The air in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria dropped the pen onto the table with a clatter. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard calculation. "Do not be difficult, Lily," she warned, her voice dropping an octave. "I am trying to save you. If you do not sign this, the police will be here by noon to arrest you for your father's crimes. Do you want to go to prison like him?" Lily flinched, but she did not pick up the pen. "I remembered what Thomas told me," she stammered. "He said I should not sign." Victoria stood up, towering over the girl. "Thomas the gardener," she spat. "You are taking legal advice from a homeless man who sleeps in a shed. You really have lost your mind, haven't you?" She leaned down, getting right in Lily's face. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You have two choices. You sign this paper right now, and I clear the debt. Or I pick up this phone and call Dr. Sterling. He agrees with me that your behavior lately has been erratic, paranoid, dangerous. I can have you committed to the state asylum this afternoon. They have a padded room waiting just for you." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The asylum. It was the ultimate weapon, the fear that Victoria had cultivated in Lily for years. I saw my daughter's hand tremble as she reached for the pen. The conditioning was too strong. The fear was too deep. She gripped the silver barrel, her knuckles turning white. Victoria smiled triumphantly, tapping the signature line. "Right there, darling. Just sign, and it is all over." Lily touched the nib to the paper. I pressed my forehead against the glass, willing her to stop, willing her to remember the newspaper article. "Don't do it, Lily," I whispered. "Please don't do it." She froze. The pen hovered over the paper, leaving a single black dot of ink. She looked at the paper, then at Victoria, then toward the window where I stood in the shadows. She put the pen down. Victoria stared at the pen lying on the table, and the veins in her neck began to bulge. Her patience had evaporated. She reached out and grabbed Lily's wrist, digging her nails into the tender skin. "Pick it up," she hissed, her voice vibrating with suppressed violence. "Pick it up and sign, or so help me God. I will have the orderlies dragging you out of here in a straitjacket within the hour." Lily let out a small cry of pain. I saw the fight leaving her eyes. The terror of the asylum was overriding her logic. She reached for the pen again, her hand shaking uncontrollably. I had to act. I could not rush in and punch Victoria, not yet. I needed a diversion that would break the psychological hold she had on my daughter without revealing my identity. Next to the French doors stood a massive terracotta urn containing a decorative ficus tree. It weighed at least 50 pounds. I did not just tip it over. I threw my entire shoulder into it, shoving it with the force of a battering ram. The planter crashed onto the stone terrace with a sound like a bomb going off. The terracotta shattered into jagged shards, and the heavy root ball hit the ground with a dull thud that shook the glass panes of the doors. Victoria screamed, jumping back as if she had been shot. Her grip on Lily's wrist broke. She spun around, her eyes blazing with fury as she saw the destruction outside. She threw open the French doors, storming out onto the terrace like a hurricane. "You clumsy idiot," she shrieked, getting right in my face. "That planter was imported from Tuscany. Look what you have done. You are fired. Do you hear me? Get your things and get out." I cowered before her, playing the role of the terrified servant, hunching my shoulders to make myself look smaller. "I am so sorry, ma'am," I stammered, my eyes darting past her to Lily, who was still sitting on the sofa, paralyzed by the chaos. I slipped on the wet stone. "Please forgive me." As Victoria unleashed a torrent of abuse, calling me every name in the book, I locked eyes with my daughter. I tapped my chest rapidly with my hand, miming a gasping motion. It was a signal we used to use when she was a child and wanted to get out of boring dinner parties. The asthma excuse. Lily caught my gaze. For a second she looked confused, but then understanding dawned in her eyes. She grabbed her throat and let out a loud wheezing gasp. "I cannot breathe," she choked out, knocking into the coffee table. "My chest. I need my inhaler." She slid off the sofa onto the floor, clutching her throat and making a terrifying rasping sound. Victoria spun around, distracted from her tirade against me. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she groaned, rolling her eyes. "Get up, Lily. Stop being so dramatic." But Lily committed to the role. She curled into a ball on the rug, gasping for air, her face turning red. "I cannot breathe," she wheezed again, louder this time. Victoria looked at the mess on the terrace, then at the girl gasping on the floor. She realized she was losing control of the moment. She could not force a girl in the middle of a medical emergency to sign a legal document without it looking suspicious later. She let out a scream of frustration. "Fine," she yelled, throwing her hands up. "Go. Get out of my sight. Go find your inhaler and stay in your room. But listen to me carefully. The buyer is coming tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. He is bringing the cash and the notary. You will be standing in this room washed and dressed, and you will sign that paper in front of him. Do you understand? No more delays." Lily nodded frantically, scrambling to her feet and running out of the room, still clutching her chest. Victoria turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. "And you," she spat, "clean this mess up, every single shard. If I see a speck of dirt tomorrow morning, I will have the police remove you for vandalism. Now get out of my face." She slammed the doors shut and poured herself a drink. I bent down to pick up the pieces of the shattered pot, hiding the smile that was threatening to break across my face. She thought she had won. She thought she had just bought herself 24 hours. But she had no idea that the buyer arriving tomorrow was not her savior. He was her executioner. The neon sign of the 24-hour diner across the street cast a flickering red glow into Sebastian's office, mirroring the anger that burned low and steady in my gut. It was 2 a.m, and the city was asleep, but inside that room, the air was electric, with the energy of a hunt entering its final phase. Sebastian paced the length of the Persian rug, holding a tumbler of scotch, his mind working through the legal intricacies of the trap we were about to spring. "Victoria is desperate, Conrad," he said, stopping to look at the rain streaking the window. "She is bleeding cash. She has liquidated her jewelry, she has maxed out the credit lines, and she has a flight booked for Tuesday. She needs $5 million to disappear, and she needs it yesterday. If we approach her with a standard offer, she will get suspicious. She will want to negotiate. She will want to wait for a better price. We need to offer her something she cannot say no to." I sat in the leather armchair, steepling my fingers. "Greed is her weakness, Sebastian," I said. "It always has been. If you offer her a way out that looks too good to be true, she won't question it. She will grab it with both hands." Sebastian nodded, walking back to his desk. He pulled up a file on his laptop screen. "I have set up a shell company, Argus Holdings. It is registered in Delaware, completely anonymous. Tomorrow morning at 8 sharp, I am going to call her. I will introduce myself as the representative for a private foreign investor who is looking to acquire prime Greenwich real estate immediately for a tax shelter. He turned the screen to face me. The offer letter was already drafted. It was a thing of beauty. We are not going to offer her 5 million. We are going to offer her $6 million in cash wired directly to her account upon signing. No inspections, no contingencies, no questions asked. But there is a catch. The deal has to close tomorrow by noon. Take it or leave it. 6 million, I murmured. $1 million over the asking price. She will lose her mind. She will think she won the lottery. Exactly, Sebastian smiled a cold, shark-like grin. The extra $1 million is the bait. It will blind her to the danger. She will be so focused on the money she won't stop to think why a buyer would be so reckless. She will forge documents. She will coerce Lily. She will do whatever it takes to get that signature on the deed because she cannot let $6 million walk out the door. And the moment she signs the sale agreement, claiming she has the legal authority to sell the property, I said, finishing his thought, she commits fraud. Grand larceny, fraud, and forgery, Sebastian confirmed. Since the house is actually in a trust for Lily, Victoria has no right to sell it. By presenting herself as the owner and accepting the money, she is sealing her own warrant. We will have her on tape, we will have the documents, and we will have the police waiting in the hallway. I stood up, walking to the window to look out at the city I had built and lost. It is perfect, I said. She wants a quick exit. We are going to give her a trapdoor straight to prison. Make the call, Sebastian. Tell her the buyer is eccentric and impatient. Tell her he is bringing the cash in a briefcase because he does not trust banks. Make her believe she is the smartest person in the room. Sebastian picked up his phone, checking the time. 6 hours until showtime. You better get back to the shed, Conrad. You have a big day tomorrow. I nodded, buttoning my coat. Tomorrow the gardener disappears and Conrad Blackwood returns from the dead. I hope she is wearing waterproof mascara. She is going to need it. The darkness of the estate was usually my cover, but tonight it felt heavy with a threat I recognized from years of sleeping with one eye open. I had returned from Sebastian's office with the taste of victory already on my tongue, but I needed to make sure Lily was safe until morning. I found her waiting by the old oak tree near the pool house, hugging her thin arms against the chill. She looked terrified but hopeful, scanning the shadows for a sign that I had returned. I started to move toward her, but stopped mid-stride. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was a primal warning, a vibration in the air that screamed danger. 10 years in a violent prison had given me eyes in the back of my head, and right now they were telling me I was being hunted. I did not turn around immediately. I listened. Over the hum of the pool filter and the rustle of the wind, I heard the faint scrape of a shoe on the patio stones. Then came the sharp intake of breath, the sound of a man winding up for a kill shot. Braden. He had found us. He had been drinking. I could smell the expensive scotch wafting on the breeze, and he had decided to take care of the gardener problem himself. I heard the whistle of the aluminum baseball bat slicing through the air, aimed directly at the back of my skull. In my old life as a CEO, I would have been dead, but I was not that man anymore. I dropped my center of gravity, pivoting on my left heel with a speed that defied my age. The bat whooshed past my ear, missing me by a fraction of an inch. Braden stumbled forward, carried by the momentum of his swing. He was sloppy drunk and slow. Before he could recover, I stepped inside his guard. My left hand clamped onto his wrist, like a steel trap, halting the bat. My right hand struck his solar plexus hard enough to empty his lungs. He made a wet, wheezing sound, and his eyes bulged. I swept his legs out from under him, and he hit the concrete deck with a bone-jarring thud. It had taken less than 10 seconds. He lay there gasping, trying to suck in air, the bat clattering uselessly away across the stones. I did not give him time to think. I grabbed him by the collar of his silk shirt and dragged him to the edge of the swimming pool. "You want to be a tough guy, Braden," I growled. "Let us see how tough you are when you cannot breathe." I shoved his head underwater, holding him there with the relentless grip of a man who had held his own against cartel enforcers. He thrashed wildly, his expensive loafers scraping against the coping water, splashing everywhere as he fought for air. I held him down, counting the seconds, letting the chlorine sting his eyes and the panic flood his brain. I wanted him sober. I wanted him to remember this. After 10 seconds, I yanked him up. He came up sputtering, coughing up water, his hair plastered to his face, looking like a drowned rat. "Who are you?" he choked out. Wiping water from his eyes, terror replacing his usual arrogance. "You are not a gardener. No gardener fights like that." I leaned in close, my face inches from his so he could see the scar running down my cheek in the moonlight. "I am the consequence, Braden," I whispered. "I am the bill coming due for every cruel thing you have done to my daughter." I shoved him backward, leaving him sprawling on the wet deck. "Get up. Go inside. And listen to me carefully." He stared up at me, shaking violently from the cold and the shock. "What do you want?" he stammered. "I want you to be ready," I said, my voice low and final. "Tomorrow morning I want you to wake up early. I want you to shave. I want you to put on your best suit. Wear the expensive one, Braden. Look your absolute best." "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Because tomorrow is the last day you will ever set foot in this house," I said. "And when they take your picture for the mugshot, you will want to look presentable. Now run." He scrambled to his feet, slipping on the wet tiles, and ran toward the house without looking back. I watched him go, knowing that the fear I had just planted in him would keep him quiet until the trap snapped shut. The morning of the sale dawned with a deceptive calm. The sky over Greenwich was a piercing blue, but inside the estate the atmosphere was thick with the static electricity of a coming storm. From the crack in the shed door, I watched the house wake up. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a mobilization. Victoria was moving with the frantic energy of a general preparing for a final desperate stand. She knew she was hours away from either total victory or total ruin, and the pressure was making her sloppy. Through the large bay windows of the drawing room, I saw her dragging Lily into a chair. My daughter looked exhausted, her skin pale and waxy under the harsh morning light. She was still recovering from the sedatives and the trauma of the last few days, but Victoria did not care about her health. She cared about the presentation. I watched as my wife applied makeup to my daughter's face with aggressive, jerky movements. She plastered thick layers of foundation over Lily's cheeks, hiding the hollows of malnutrition and the dark circles of sleeplessness. She painted Lily's lips a bright, unnatural red and forced her into a stiff, high-collared dress that covered the bruises on her arms. It was a grotesque transformation. Victoria was turning a living, breathing young woman into a prop. She needed Lily to look healthy, happy, and most importantly, compliant for the buyer. She could not have a starving servant girl standing next to the notary. She needed the heiress of the Blackwood estate. I could see Lily flinching as the brush hit a tender spot, but she sat still, her eyes fixed on the middle distance, dissociated from the humiliation. It broke my heart to see her treated like a doll, but I held my ground. "Just a few more hours," I promised silently. "Just hold on." Victoria stepped away from Lily, examining her handiwork critically before snatching up her phone. She paced the room, her voice carrying through the open window, loud and shrill. "Alessandro, listen to me," she snapped. "Stop asking about the transfer limit. I told you the wire hits at noon. $6 million. Yes, I have the tickets. Just be at the airport and do not drink before I get there. I am not carrying you onto the plane." She hung up and took a deep breath, smoothing her hair. She was so close to the finish line she could taste the champagne. She thought she had pulled off the perfect crime. Then she turned her attention to the loose end. Me. She marched across the lawn toward the gardening shed, her heels sinking into the soft turf. She did not look fearful, she looked annoyed. When she reached the door, she did not even open it. She just banged her fist against the wood. "Thomas," she shouted through the planks, "I do not want to see your face today. You stay in there until I come get you. Do not make a sound. Do not come out for water. Do not even breathe too loud. If you ruin this deal for me, I will have you thrown in jail for vagrancy." I heard the heavy metallic slide of the external padlock hasp, followed by the definitive click of the lock snapping shut. She tested it, rattling the door against the frame to make sure it was secure. "Good," she muttered to herself, before turning and walking back to the house. She thought she had trapped a dirty gardener. She thought she had secured the perimeter. She had no idea that she had just locked a wolf in the henhouse. I waited until her footsteps faded away. I looked at the heavy padlock from the inside. It was a Master Lock Model 3 solid steel. To a gardener, it was a prison. To Conrad Blackwood, it was a minor inconvenience. I reached into my boot and pulled out the shim I had crafted from a discarded soda can. It was time to get dressed for my own party. The silence inside the shed was heavy, but it was not the silence of imprisonment. It was the silence of a dressing room before the curtain rises. I waited until I was sure Victoria was back in the main house before I moved toward the corner of the room, where a stack of hay bales leaned against the damp wood. I pulled them aside, revealing a black waterproof duffel bag that Sebastian had smuggled in 2 nights ago. I unzipped it slowly, the sound loud in the quiet room. Inside, folded with precision, was my armor. It was not Kevlar or chainmail. It was a charcoal gray bespoke Brioni suit tailored in Rome over a decade ago. It smelled of cedar and old money, a scent that instantly transported me back to a life I had almost forgotten. I stripped off the filthy gardener's shirt and the stained trousers, kicking them into the corner with a sense of profound release. I stood there for a moment in the cold air, letting the chill wake up every nerve ending in my body. Then I walked over to the rusted metal bucket I used for washing. I filled a chipped enamel basin with cold water and propped a shard of broken mirror against the window ledge. I picked up the straight razor Sebastian had included in the bag. My hand was steady. I lathered my face with a bar of harsh soap and began to scrape away the mask I had worn for weeks. Stroke by stroke, Thomas the gardener fell into the basin. The thick, matted beard that had hidden my identity mixed with the gray suds revealing the sharp jawline and the hard mouth of Conrad Blackwood. When I rinsed the foam away, I stared at the reflection. The face staring back was older. The eyes were colder. And there, running down my left cheek, was the jagged white scar that prison had carved into me. I did not try to hide it. It was not a deformity. It was a map of my survival. It was the proof that I had walked through hell and come out the other side. I dried my face and began to dress. The white silk shirt felt cool and smooth against my scarred skin, a shocking contrast to the rough cotton I had grown used to. I fastened the gold cufflinks, my fingers remembering the movements as if I had done it yesterday. I pulled on the trousers and finally the jacket. It fit perfectly, hugging my shoulders with a reassuring weight. I tied the silk tie in a perfect Windsor knot and adjusted my cuffs. I was no longer the help. I was the master of the house. I turned to the door. The heavy padlock was still holding it shut from the outside, a symbol of Victoria's arrogance. She thought steel could hold me. I took a thin piece of metal from my pocket, the shim I had crafted earlier. I slid it into the mechanism, feeling for the catch. I applied a precise amount of torque, and with a sharp metallic click, the shackle popped open. I pushed the door wide. The morning sunlight flooded in, blindingly bright. I stepped out of the shadows and onto the grass. Thomas was gone. Conrad Blackwood had returned, and he was ready to collect his debts. I watched from the edge of the terrace, concealed by the stone pillars, as the black Lincoln town car crunched up the gravel driveway. It was precisely 9 o'clock. Sebastian stepped out of the back seat carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. He adjusted his tie, glancing briefly toward the spot where he knew I was watching before ascending the steps. He looked every inch the corporate executioner, calm, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. Inside the drawing room, Victoria was practically vibrating with anticipation. She had positioned herself in the center of the room, a queen holding court, in a kingdom she had already sold. When the doorbell rang, she did not wait for the staff she had fired or the daughter she had enslaved to answer it. She threw the doors open herself, her smile so wide it looked painful. "Mr. Cole," she gushed, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "You are right on time. Please tell me you brought the paperwork. And the briefcase." Sebastian walked past her, entering the room with the air of a man who owned the oxygen he was breathing. He placed the briefcase on the ornate coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the silent room, drawing everyone's eyes. Even Lily, who had been staring at her lap, looked up. The briefcase represented her freedom or her doom. She just did not know which yet. Victoria stared at the leather case with hungry eyes, almost reaching out to touch it before stopping herself. "Is that it?" she whispered, her voice thick with greed. $6 million. "The funds are secured, Mrs. Blackwood," Sebastian said, his voice smooth and professional. "Every penny is accounted for. Verified by the bank this morning." He kept his hand on the handle, not opening it. Victoria licked her lips. "Excellent. Then let us sign. I have the deed right here. The notary is on his way. We can conclude this in 10 minutes. She reached for the pen again, desperate to close the loop before reality could intervene. Sebastian did not move. He did not sit. He simply stood there, blocking her path to the money. "There is a slight change in protocol," he said. "My employer, the principal investor, decided he wanted to be here personally for the signing. He is parking his car now. He prefers to handle the final exchange face to face." Victoria's smile faltered. Her eyes darted to the window nervously. A personal visit. That was not part of the agreement. "You said he was a silent partner, an eccentric recluse." "I do not have time for a tour, Mr. Cole. I have a flight to catch. We agreed on a quick sale." Sebastian raised a hand, silencing her. "And it will be quick. But given the significant amount of cash involved, my client wants to inspect the merchandise one last time. He wants to make sure all the assets included in the sale are in acceptable condition." Victoria frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Assets? What are you talking about?" "The house is sold as is. The furniture is included. The art is included. I haven't touched a thing. What else could he possibly want to check?" Sebastian turned slowly, pivoting on his heel until he was facing the sofa. He was not looking at the antique rug. He was not looking at the crystal chandelier. He was looking directly at Lily. My daughter sat frozen under his gaze, feeling the weight of his attention, but not understanding its meaning. Sebastian looked back at Victoria, his expression unreadable. Not the furniture, Mrs. Blackwood. The living assets. The girl. The contract clearly states she comes with the house. Victoria laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You are joking. Lily is not an asset. She is just here." She waved a hand dismissively. "If he wants her gone, she can be out by noon." Sebastian shook his head. "On the contrary, he is very interested in her well-being. In fact, he is walking up the steps right now to ask her himself." The heavy oak front doors creaked open behind them, and the sound of confident footsteps echoed in the hallway. The trap had snapped shut. The heavy double doors of the drawing room swung open with a groan that sounded like a tomb being unsealed. I stepped across the threshold, and the sound of my Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed through the silent house. It was a sound that commanded attention, a rhythm of authority that I had not walked with in 10 years. I stopped in the center of the archway, letting the morning light from the foyer frame me in a halo of gold. I was no longer the hunched figure in dirty work clothes. I stood at my full height of 6'2", my shoulders squared in the charcoal Brioni suit that fit me like a second skin. The silk tie was knotted with military precision, and the vintage Patek Philippe on my wrist caught the light, sending a flash of gold across the room. I saw the heir leave the room. Victoria froze mid-step, her hand still extended toward Sebastian. She turned her head slowly, her eyes tracking from my polished shoes up the sharp crease of my trousers, past the silk lapels of my jacket, and finally resting on my face. I watched the confusion war with greed in her eyes. She saw the jagged white scar running down my cheek, and for a microsecond I saw a flicker of recognition. She knew the shape of my jaw. She knew the color of my eyes. But her mind simply refused to accept the data. Conrad Blackwood was dead. He was a memory, a ghost, a closed file in a lawyer's cabinet. And Thomas the gardener was a filthy peasant locked in a shed. Therefore, this man standing before her, this powerful, imposing figure, could only be one thing. Her savior, the billionaire buyer. She swallowed hard, pushing down the unease that was prickling at the back of her neck. She smoothed the front of her dress, forcing that practiced, dazzling smile onto her face, the one that had fooled me so completely a decade ago. She took a step toward me, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. "You must be the principal investor. Mr. Cole did not tell me you were quite so distinguished. I am Victoria Blackwood. Welcome to my home." She extended her hand, expecting me to take it, expecting me to bow to her charm, like every other man she had manipulated. I did not move. I did not take her hand. I simply looked at it until she felt foolish and let it drop to her side. I walked past her, ignoring her, completely moving into the center of the room. I ran a gloved finger along the back of the velvet sofa, inspecting the dust, checking the quality of the fabric. I walked over to the fireplace, looking up at the oil painting of my grandfather that still hung above the mantel. I was reclaiming my space, occupying the room with a gravity that made the furniture seem small. Victoria faltered, her smile twitching. She looked at Sebastian for help, but he was staring at the wall, his face a mask of stone. She trotted after me, her heels clacking nervously on the wood. "I hope everything meets your approval, sir," she stammered. "As you can see, the estate is in pristine condition. We have maintained the historical integrity of the architecture while updating the amenities. It is truly a jewel of Greenwich." I stopped abruptly and turned to face her. I looked deep into her eyes, letting her see the cold fire burning in mine. "It is a beautiful structure," I said, my voice low and resonant, the gravel of prison mixed with the polish of the boardroom. "The foundations are strong. The view is impressive." Victoria exhaled a breath she did not know she was holding, her greed surging back to the surface. "Thank you," she beamed. "I am so glad you think so. We can sign the papers immediately if you are ready." I took a slow step toward her, invading her personal space until I was looming over her. "But there is a problem," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. She blinked, confused. "A problem? Is it the price? We can discuss the terms." "No," I said, cutting her off. "It is not the price, it is the atmosphere." I took a deep theatrical breath, inhaling the scent of the room. "This house is beautiful, Victoria, but it smells. It smells like rot. It smells like lies, and I cannot buy a house until I clean out the garbage." I turned my back on Victoria, leaving her stammering about the smell of rot, and walked straight toward the corner of the room where Lily was sitting. My daughter looked small in the high-backed velvet chair, her body curled inward as if she were trying to disappear into the upholstery. She was staring at the tips of her worn-out shoes, terrified to make eye contact with the wealthy stranger who had just insulted the house. To her, I was just another powerful man, another potential abuser in a long line of people who had failed her. I stopped directly in front of her. The room went deadly quiet. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds of a life I had missed. I reached out my hand. Lily flinched, drawing a sharp breath, and turning her face away, expecting a blow. The sight of her reflex fear tore a hole in my heart, but I kept my hand steady. I gently placed my index finger under her chin and tilted her face upward, forcing her to look at me. Her eyes were wide and swimming with unshed tears. She looked at my face, searching the features. She saw the scar. She saw the expensive suit. She saw the cold blue eyes. There was a flicker of confusion in her gaze. She sensed something familiar, a ghost of a memory from a childhood bedtime story, but the context was all wrong. She did not see Thomas the gardener, and she could not believe she was seeing her dead father. She was lost in the space between fear and recognition. I did not let her go. I held her gaze, then spoke clearly, my voice cutting through the tension. "Does this one come with the house?" I asked. "Is she included in the sale price?" Victoria let out a sharp, impatient laugh. She rushed forward, her heels clicking rapidly on the parquet floor, inserting herself into the conversation. She waved a hand at Lily as if she were shooing away a stray dog. "Oh, please ignore her," she said, her voice shrill with desperation. "She is nobody, just the help, a charity case I keep around out of pity. She is mentally unstable and completely irrelevant to our transaction." She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me toward the desk. "Please, sir, let us not waste time on the servants. The money is on the table. Just sign the papers and she will be gone by noon." She called my daughter nobody. She called the heir to my empire irrelevant. The rage that I had been suppressing for 10 years, the anger of every cold night in a prison cell, the fury of seeing my child scrubbing floors, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot energy. I did not look at the papers. I did not look at the money. I turned on my heel, my movement fluid and violent. I did not hold back. I swung my hand, with the full weight of my body, behind it. My open palm connected with Victoria's cheek with a sound that cracked like a gunshot. It was loud enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. The force of the blow spun her around completely. She stumbled, her legs tangling in her expensive dress, and she crashed onto the sofa, clutching her face. The room froze. Silence descended like a heavy curtain. Lily gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Sebastian stood by the desk, not a muscle moving on his face, watching the justice unfold. Victoria looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock, her hand covering the rapidly reddening mark on her cheek. She could not process what had just happened. People did not hit Victoria Blackwood. People obeyed her. "You," she gasped, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. "You struck me." I stood over her, adjusting my cufflinks calmly, my face a mask of cold fury. "I did not strike you, Victoria," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I was just swatting a fly. Now get up. We are not done." "You struck me," Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and high-pitched rage. She scrambled backward on the velvet cushions, her hand clawing for the bell pull that summoned the household staff. She looked around the room wildly, her eyes bulging. "Security!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Get in here. Arrest this maniac. I want him thrown out. I want him in jail. Help me!" Her screams echoed off the vaulted ceiling and died in the empty hallway. No heavy footsteps came running. No uniformed guards burst through the doors. There was only silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on her chest. She pressed the button again and again, her manicured finger jabbing the plastic until it nearly broke. I watched her panic with a cold, detached amusement, standing perfectly still in the center of the room. "You are screaming at ghosts, Victoria," I said calmly, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "There is no security. The staff left an hour ago. There is no one coming to save you. It is just you, me, and the truth." Victoria stopped screaming. She looked at the empty doorway, then back at me. Her chest was heaving, and for the first time, real fear began to dawn behind her eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are not a buyer. You are not an investor. Who are you and what do you want?" I did not answer her with words. I reached inside my tailored jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I did not hand it to her. I tossed it onto the coffee table with a contemptuous flick of my wrist. The heavy packet landed with a loud slap, sliding across the polished mahogany and fanning out in front of her. "Look at it," I commanded. Victoria looked down. Her eyes widened as she recognized the documents. On top was a death certificate with a raised seal dated 2018. It declared Conrad Blackwood deceased by accidental drowning in the Amazon basin. Next to it was a ledger written in her own handwriting, detailing the fabrication of a massive debt attributed to a dead man. And beneath that were the bank records from the Cayman Islands, showing the illegal transfer of company assets into her private accounts. Her face went ashen. She reached out a shaking hand to touch the papers. "Where did you get these?" she stammered. These are private files. You stole them. This is illegal." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. "I have more than just paper." "Victoria," I said. "I have your own voice." I tapped the screen. The recording I had made from the garden the night before began to play. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the silence of the room. "It is done, Alessandro. $5 million. Lily stays here. By the time she realizes I am gone, she will be buried under lawsuits." Lily let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her hands, as she heard her stepmother condemn her to poverty and prison. Victoria recoiled as if she had been physically struck by the sound of her own betrayal. She stared at the phone, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "Turn it off," she pleaded, her voice barely a squeak. "Stop it." I silenced the phone and took a slow, deliberate step toward her. I leaned down, placing my hands on the knees of her expensive dress, trapping her on the sofa. I brought my face inches from hers, forcing her to look into my eyes. I saw the moment the recognition hit her like a physical blow. I saw her pupils dilate as her brain finally connected the dots. The scar, the voice, the eyes. "Look closely." "Victoria," I hissed, the words vibrating with a decade of suppressed rage. "You paid a doctor $50,000 to sign that death certificate. You spent 10 years spending my money and erasing my name. You told the world I was rotting in a jungle. So tell me." I leaned in closer until I could smell the fear on her breath. "Do I look like a dead man to you?" The realization hit Victoria like a physical blow, shattering the last remnants of her composure. I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. Her pupils dilated until her eyes were almost entirely black holes of terror staring back at me. She tried to stand up to regain some semblance of the imperious queen she had played for so long, but her body refused to obey. Her knees buckled under the weight of the impossible truth standing before her. She collapsed not gracefully onto the sofa, but heavily onto the floor, sliding down until she was kneeling at my feet amidst the scattered papers of her own crimes. "Conrad," she whispered, the name clawing its way out of her throat. "It is not possible. The report said. The warden said you were dead. You died in the riot. I paid for the confirmation." Her confession hung in the air. She had not just waited for news of my death, she had paid for it. She had been in contact with the prison. She knew exactly where I was, and she had paid to keep me there until I stopped breathing. Suddenly, a guttural roar erupted from the doorway. Braden had entered the room, drawn by his mother's screams. He saw Victoria on the floor trembling and me standing over her. He did not see a billionaire or a ghost, he saw a threat. He did not think, he just reacted with the blind, sloppy aggression of a bully. "Get away from her!" he screamed, charging across the room, his hands reaching for my throat. I did not move. I did not have to. Sebastian stepped forward from the shadows near the desk. He moved with a speed that belied his age and his tailored suit. As Braden lunged, Sebastian didn't just block him, he dismantled him. He stepped inside Braden's guard, intercepting the strike with a forearm block that sounded like a cracking whip. In one fluid motion, Sebastian grabbed Braden's lapel and swept his leg, sweeping the younger man off his feet. Braden hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of him instantly. Sebastian stood over him, adjusting his glasses calmly. "I would stay down if I were you, son," he said, his voice mild but steel-hard. "I have a black belt in Shotokan, and I have been dying to use it all morning." Braden groaned, clutching his ribs, looking up at the lawyer in shock. The room fell silent again, save for Victoria's ragged breathing. She looked up at me, her hands gripping the hem of my trousers like a beggar. But how she stammered, tears finally spilling over. 10 years, Conrad. They said you were gone. They said there was no body, but you were dead. You were supposed to be dead. I looked down at the woman who had stolen a decade of my life. I looked at the gray in her hair that she dyed away and the lines of cruelty around her mouth. I remembered the nights in the cell when I had nothing to eat but hatred. I remembered the cold stone floor and the smell of rot. I leaned down until my face was level with hers. I did die. "Victoria," I said, my voice a low rumble that seemed to come from the grave itself. "The man you married died in that cell. He was weak. He trusted you. But something else survived." I tapped the scar on my cheek. I crawled through the mud. I ate garbage. I survived beatings that would have killed a lesser man. And do you know why? I didn't do it for freedom. I didn't do it for money. I lived for this exact second. I lived to stand here and watch you realize that you have lost everything. I am not a ghost, Victoria. I am your judgment day. Victoria scrambled to her feet, her dignity in tatters, but her greed still functioning like a reflex mechanism. She wiped the mascara from her cheeks and smoothed her dress, trying to summon the arrogance that had sustained her for a decade. She looked at me and then at the legal documents scattered on the floor. A look of desperate cunning crossed her face. "Fine," she spat, her voice shaking but defiant. "You are alive. Congratulations on your survival, Conrad. But that does not change the law. You were declared dead legally. That process takes months to reverse. And in the meantime, I am the surviving spouse. My name is on the deed to this house. I have the title in my safe. You might be back, but you are currently a trespasser on my property. This house belongs to me, and if you do not leave, I will have the police remove you." She actually believed it. She thought a piece of paper she had forged could stand against the hurricane that was blowing through her life. I did not speak. I simply looked at Sebastian. He nodded, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. He stepped forward toward the coffee table and finally opened the heavy leather briefcase. Victoria leaned forward, expecting to see stacks of $100 bills. Instead, she saw a single blue folder stamped with the seal of the Supreme Court. Sebastian picked it up, handling it with the reverence of a holy text. "You are operating under a significant misconception, Mrs. Blackwood," Sebastian said, his voice calm and precise. "You assumed that when Conrad died, the estate passed to you. That would be true if Conrad had owned the house personally, but he did not." Victoria froze. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. Sebastian opened the folder. 20 years ago, when Lily was born, Conrad placed this estate and the bulk of his liquid assets into the Blackwood Irrevocable Trust. He wanted to ensure that no matter what happened to him, his daughter would always be protected. He pulled out a document, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. Clause 7, Section B states clearly that in the event of the grantor's death or disappearance, the right of residency and ownership is held in trust until the beneficiary reaches the age of majority plus 3 years. That age is 24. Sebastian turned to look at Lily, who was still huddled in the chair, her eyes wide with confusion. He smiled at her, a genuine warm smile. I believe today is a special day, isn't it, Lily? Happy birthday. You turned 24 at midnight. He turned back to Victoria, snapping the folder shut with a sound like a gavel striking a bench. As of 12 o'clock this morning, this house does not belong to the estate of Conrad Blackwood. It does not belong to you. It belongs entirely and exclusively to Lily Blackwood. The color drained from Victoria's face so completely she looked like a corpse. She staggered back, hitting the wall. No, she gasped. That is impossible. I have been paying the taxes. I have been running this house. You have been a squatter, Sebastian corrected her ruthlessly. For the last 5 years, you have been living in Lily's house. You have been eating Lily's food. You have been sleeping under a roof that belongs to the girl you forced to sleep in a shed. You have no rights here, Victoria. You are not the owner. You are an intruder. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Do you understand what that means, Victoria? I asked, my voice low and hard. It means you do not have the authority to sell this house. It means the contract you were about to sign is fraud. And it means that for the last 6 years, you have been trespassing on private property. Lily is not the servant here. You are. And your lease has just expired. Victoria backed away until her spine hit the silk wallpaper. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps like a fish thrown onto dry land. Her eyes darted around the room looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for anything that could change the reality closing in on her. But there was nowhere to run. She smoothed her dress with trembling hands and forced a jagged laugh. Fine, she spat, her voice shrill and brittle. So the house belongs to the brat. Keep it. I do not want this drafty old mausoleum anyway. I have my own money. I have millions in my private accounts. I will leave right now. I will go to Europe and I will never see either of you again. Come on, Braden. She reached for her purse, which was sitting on the side table. She grabbed it, clutching the leather strap like a lifeline. She turned to leave, her chin held high, trying to salvage one last scrap of dignity. I did not move to stop her. I simply crossed my arms and leaned against the heavy oak desk. You are not going to Europe, Victoria, I said, my voice calm and final. You are not even going to the airport. And as for that money you think you have, I have some bad news. She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. She turned back slowly, dread creeping into her expression. What are you talking about? I walked over to the table and picked up the ledger I had thrown earlier. You told Lily she had to work to pay off my debt. You told her I embezzled $850,000. That was a very specific number, Victoria. It was specific because that is exactly the amount you siphoned out of the company pension fund the week after I disappeared. I dropped the ledger. It landed with a thud. I did not steal that money. You did. You framed a dead man, and then you made his daughter pay for your crime. But here is the thing about forensic accounting. It leaves a trail. Victoria's face went white. That is a lie, she whispered. Is it? I asked. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. I spent the last 48 hours on the phone with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the banking authorities in Zurich. We tracked every single wire transfer. We found the shell companies in Panama. We found the crypto wallets. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, precisely 10 minutes ago, every single account linked to your name has been frozen under the RICO Act. Victoria pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers flying across the screen. She opened her banking app. I watched her face as the screen loaded. I saw the moment the red text appeared. Account suspended. Contact law enforcement. She swiped to the next bank. Suspended. And the next. Frozen. She dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. No, she gasped, her voice barely audible. My money! You cannot do this. That is my money. It was never your money, I said, stepping closer. It was Lily's inheritance. It was the workers' pensions. You have been living on stolen time and stolen cash. But it gets worse, Victoria. I found the loan documents in your desk. I know about the $3 million you owe to the syndicate in Atlantic City. I know about the gambling debts. I leaned in close until I was whispering directly into her ear. Those people do not care about frozen assets. They want their money today. And you, Victoria, you are completely penniless. You do not just have the police coming for you, you have the sharks circling, and you have absolutely nothing left to throw them. The silence following my revelation was shattered by a sound that Victoria had probably spent 10 years dreading. It started as a low wail in the distance, but within seconds it grew into a deafening cacophony. Sirens. Dozens of them. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high-arched windows painting the drawing room in the strobe light of emergency. Victoria ran to the window, clutching her throat. Through the glass she saw not just a patrol car, but a fleet of black SUVs and marked cruisers swarming the driveway, blocking the exit and sealing her fate. Sebastian checked his watch and adjusted his glasses. Right on time, he murmured. The front doors of the mansion did not open. They were thrown wide with a force that shook the walls. A team of officers in tactical gear stormed into the foyer, their boots thundering on the marble like a drum roll. Federal agents, everyone stay where you are. The command echoed through the house, shaking the crystal in the chandelier. Victoria stumbled back, knocking over a Ming vase that shattered on the floor. You called the police, she screamed at me, her eyes wild with betrayal. You called the police on your own wife. Ex-wife, I corrected her calmly, stepping back to give the officers room. And I didn't call the police, Victoria. I called the district attorney. 2 officers marched into the drawing room. One of them, a stern woman with a badge on her belt, held up a warrant. Victoria Blackwood, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, money laundering, and the aggravated abuse of a dependent. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Victoria let out a shriek of pure indignation. Do not touch me, she yelled, swatting at the officer's hand like a petulant child. Do you know who I am? I am the lady of this house. This is a mistake. I will have your badge for this. I will sue this entire department. The officer did not blink. She spun Victoria around with practiced efficiency, slamming her against the silk wallpaper. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest melody I had ever heard. It was the sound of the steel trap finally closing. You have the right to remain silent, the officer recited, her voice flat and bored. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Across the room, Braden tried to make a run for the terrace door, hoping to slip away in the chaos. He made it 3 steps before a burly officer blocked his path. Going somewhere, son? The officer asked. We took the liberty of searching your vehicle on the way in. Nice Porsche. Shame about the significant amount of cocaine we found in the trunk. Possession with intent to distribute. That is a mandatory minimum sentence, Braden. Hands behind your back. Braden began to sob, his bravado dissolving into the pathetic whining of a child caught stealing candy. Mom, he wailed as the cuffs bit into his wrists. Mom, do something. They are hurting me. Tell them who we are. But Victoria could not help him. She was being hauled toward the door, her heels dragging on the floor she had claimed to own. She passed by me, her hair wild, her face a mask of twisted hate. You will rot in hell for this, Conrad, she spat, spittle flying from her lips. I will kill you. I will sue you. This is not over. I stood perfectly still, watching her struggle like a trapped animal. I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. I simply looked at the officer holding her arm. Officer, I said, my voice cutting through her screams. Take this garbage out of my house. Get her out of my sight. As they dragged her out, the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, severing her connection to the Blackwood name forever. The silence returned to the room, but this time it was not heavy. It was light. It was clean. It was the silence of a nightmare finally ending. The sirens faded into the distance, taking with them the noise and the violence that had plagued this house for a decade. The heavy oak doors were closed, and for the first time in years, the air in the drawing room felt breathable. I stood alone in the center of the vast space, a billionaire who had just destroyed his enemies. But as I turned slowly to face the corner of the room, I felt more terrified than I had ever been in prison. Lily was still standing by the velvet chair, her body rigid, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked like a statue made of glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. She had seen the gardener protect her. She had seen the billionaire destroy her stepmother. But she still did not know if she had a father. I did not walk toward her as a conqueror. I walked toward her as a penitent man. I crossed the expensive Persian rug, the distance feeling like miles. When I reached her, I did not try to hug her. I knew she was too fragile, too used to being hurt. Instead, I did something I used to do when she was a little girl and had scraped her knee. I slowly lowered myself down until I was kneeling on one knee before her. I was no longer looming over her. I was looking up at her, placing myself at her mercy. I slowly unbuttoned the cuff of my white silk shirt. I rolled up the fabric, exposing the inside of my left wrist. There, stark against my pale skin, was a distinct wine-colored birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. It was a genetic signature, a mark that only 2 people in this world possessed. I held my wrist out to her, my hand steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Look, Lily," I whispered, my voice cracking with an emotion I could no longer suppress. "Look at it." Lily's eyes drifted down. She stared at the mark. Slowly, mechanically, she lifted her own left hand. She pulled back the frayed sleeve of her gray uniform. There, on her wrist, was the exact mirror image of the crescent moon. The connection was undeniable. The biological truth cut through the fog of trauma and medication. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sharp sound of disbelief. I looked up into her face, letting the tears I had held back for 10 years finally spill over. "I am sorry, Lily. I am so sorry I was late. I am sorry I left you alone with them. I fought every single day to get back to you." Lily looked from the mark on my wrist to my face. She studied the jagged scar running down my cheek. She looked past the expensive suit and the grooming. She looked into my eyes. And in that moment, the pieces clicked into place. She saw the kindness of Thomas the gardener who had brought her warm food in the shed. She saw the fierce protection of the man who had dried Braden off the pool deck. She saw the love of the father who used to read her stories. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was you. You were there." "It was always me," I said. "I never left you." Her trembling fingers reached out. She touched the rough skin of my scar, tracing the path of the wound that had changed my face but not my heart. Her lower lip began to tremble, and her face crumpled. The dam broke. All the years of abuse, all the lonely nights, all the hunger and the fear poured out of her in a single word. "Daddy," she choked out. She collapsed forward. I caught her. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her tight against my chest, burying my face in her hair. She was so thin, so frail, but she was alive. She sobbed uncontrollably, her hands gripping the lapels of my jacket as if she were drowning, and I was the only solid ground in the world. I held her, rocking her back and forth on the floor of the house that was finally ours again. "I am here," I whispered over and over again into her hair. "I am here, and I am never letting you go again. The nightmare is over, Lily. You are safe." The house was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a clean slate. It had been 7 days since the police dragged Victoria screaming from the foyer, and in that week I had been busy scrubbing the stain of her existence from every corner of the estate. The first order of business was the staff. I lined them up in the driveway, the cook who had denied my daughter food, the maids who had turned a blind eye to her bruises, the groundskeepers who had laughed at her misery while she scrubbed the patio. They stood before me, nervously clutching their severance checks, expecting a lecture. I gave them none. I simply looked them in the eye one by one, letting them see the judgment of the man they thought was a beggar. You watched a child starve and you did nothing, I said, my voice flat and cold. You are not just fired. You are blacklisted. Do not expect a reference. Do not expect to work in this town again. Get off my property. Once the house was empty of traitors, I turned my attention to the physical reminders of the occupation. I did not donate Victoria's clothes to charity. I did not sell Braden's gaudy designer suits. I piled them all onto the center of the manicured front lawn. Fur coats worth thousands, silk dresses, Italian leather shoes, and the ridiculous velvet paintings Victoria had hung in the hallways. It was a mountain of vanity. I poured a canister of gasoline over the pile, the smell of fuel mixing with the scent of expensive perfume. I struck a single match and watched as the flames roared to life, consuming the symbols of their greed. I stood there watching the black smoke rise into the clear blue sky, feeling a profound sense of purification. The ghosts were being exorcised with fire. But the most important work was happening upstairs. I had flown in a team of specialists from Zurich, the best trauma therapists and nutritionists money could buy. There were no more sedatives, no more threats of asylums. The house was filled with the smell of healthy food and the sound of gentle voices. I watched from the doorway as a kind-faced doctor checked Lily's vitals, speaking to her with a respect she had not heard in years. She was still frail, her eyes still held the shadow of fear, but every day the color was returning to her cheeks. She was learning to breathe again. On Friday afternoon, I found her in the sunroom, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, reading a book. She looked up and smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I sat down beside her and placed a tablet in her hands. I want you to see this, I said gently. She looked at the screen. It was a bank notification. A transfer had been completed to an account in her name. She counted the zeros, her eyes going wide. $10 million, she whispered. Dad, I cannot take this. It is too much. I covered her hand with mine. It is not too much, Lily. It is barely a fraction of what was stolen from you. Consider this your pocket money. Use it to buy clothes, use it to travel, use it to help people. Do whatever you want. It is yours. You never have to ask anyone for permission to buy a loaf of bread ever again. She looked at me, tears welling up. But what about the company? What about the rest? I kissed her forehead. The 10 million is just for now, I said, looking out at the gardens. The lawyers are finalizing the paperwork. You are the heir, Lily. The Blackwood Empire is not mine. It is yours. I am just keeping the seat warm until you are ready to take the throne. The late afternoon sun bathed the Blackwood estate in a warm golden light that seemed to erase the last lingering shadows of the past. The gardens where I had once worked in silence as a ghost were now alive with the sound of a jazz quartet and the laughter of 100 guests. It was Lily's 25th birthday, but it felt like a coronation. I stood on the edge of the terrace holding a crystal flute of champagne, watching my daughter move through the crowd. She was unrecognizable from the fragile, broken girl I had found in the shed a year ago. She was wearing a dress of pale lavender silk, her hair falling in loose, healthy waves around her face. She was laughing as she spoke to a senator about her new charitable foundation, dedicated to providing legal aid for the wrongly accused. She radiated a strength and a grace that was entirely her own. She was not just surviving anymore, she was thriving. As I watched her shine, my mind drifted for a brief moment to a darker place miles away from this paradise. I thought of the gray concrete walls of the state penitentiary, where the air smelled of industrial bleach and despair. In a small, cramped cell block, Victoria was currently serving the first year of her 20-year sentence. The woman who had treated the world as her personal servant was now on her knees on a cold tile floor. She was wearing a shapeless orange jumpsuit, her hair gray and stringy without her expensive treatments. She held a toilet brush in her calloused hand, scrubbing the porcelain bowl, while a younger, tougher inmate stood over her shouting at her to scrub harder. The irony was absolute. She was living the exact life she had forced upon Lily. And in another wing, Braden sat alone in his cell, stripped of his sports cars, and his arrogance staring at a blank wall, realizing that his mother could no longer save him. They had built a prison for my daughter, but they had ended up locking themselves inside it. The sound of applause brought me back to the garden. Lily had stepped up to the microphone to make a speech, but her eyes were scanning the crowd. They found me instantly. She smiled and waved me over. I walked toward her, the crowd parting with respect for the man who had returned from the dead to burn the kingdom down and build it back up. I stepped onto the platform beside her, and she took my hand, squeezing it tight. There were no tremors in her fingers now, only warmth. We raised our glasses together, the crystal catching the sunlight. To the future, Lily whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. To the future, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. As the music swelled and the guests cheered, I looked at the beautiful, strong woman standing beside me, and I knew my work was done. Justice is a strange thing. It can be slow, it can be painful. It can take years to arrive, and sometimes it feels like it has lost the address. But it always arrives eventually. Evil may win the sprint, but truth wins the marathon. They thought they could bury the truth. They thought they could erase a father's love. But they forgot the most important rule of nature. You can cut down the tree, but if the roots are deep, it will always grow back stronger. Do not ever underestimate the power of a man who has nothing left to lose but his child. We drank the champagne, the bubbles tasting like victory, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in hues of hope and peace, the screen faded to black. The story of the Blackwood family reminds us that arrogance is a brittle shield. Victoria believed her wealth and lies made her untouchable, but she forgot that the truth is like water. It always finds a way through the cracks. It teaches us that status is temporary, but character is permanent. Treating others with cruelty, especially those we deem beneath us, plants the seeds of our own destruction. Above all, it stands as a testament to the unbreakable bond of family. No matter how deep the hole or how dark the night, love and justice will ultimately rise to claim the dawn. If this story of redemption and justice moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories.